I've flown the last 2 seasons 30,000 deer, around 200,000 acres in 8 different states.
Thermal drones, love them or hate them, some great insight can be gathered from them. We have Jack, who tells us what he discovered from flying some of the best farms across the country.
I mean, most people who guess how many deer they really have and are managing and are feeding, they're 25% off.
We talk about all the questions that are lingering in the back of our mind. Do deer use warm season grasses? Where do they bed? How do they bed? All the things. Here we go. Do you think timber holds more deer or warm season grasses?
You know, I've seen with the drone, and again, most of the time I'm flying is mid-November on. You know, from that time frame on, I hardly ever find deer. And
Jack, how you doing this morning?
I am doing fantastic. How are you, Jake?
I'm doing really good. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's dive right into it. What do you do for a living? It's got to be one of the most interesting jobs here for a guy that likes to watch deer.
I fly a big thermal drone around and go look at deer on some awesome farms all across the country. Kind of the dream job. Never thought it'd turn into what it is, but I've really enjoyed it and been finding lots of really cool stuff the last couple of years. So
what it's one of those deals like when you're growing up, you're like, man, what do you want to do? That's not on your fifth grade exercise of what you want to do when you grow up. How'd you decide to go into this? Because it's super unique and kind of on the cusp of new technology. It is the cusp of new technology.
yeah, probably 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, kind of when the modern thermal drones came out, and there was a big wave of people getting into the deer recovery and all that stuff. I saw all that. I've always been a big hunter, outdoorsman, and just, kind of thought, what an awesome tool. I mean, these things look insane online. I got to get into that. So kind of got in at the base level, saw how good the drones were, and just started the business, started growing. I started in recovery, but I've always been real analytical, into the deer management side of things. And I did my first deer survey and loved it, and just, kept doing them and getting into it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What how many farms do you think you've flown since and more so towards like surveying or scouting or whatever, not necessarily deer recovery, but everything else outside of that. How many do you think you've flown over the last few years?
Probably at 200 now.
So you have a lot of data here. Yeah, you got a lot of farms to Rolodex here. That's a lot.
I've flown the last 2 seasons about 30,000 acres, 8 different states, or excuse me, not 30,000 deer, around 200,000 acres in 8 different states.
Hold on, so say it again. About 30,000 deer over 200,000 acres?
Correct, yep.
What's the density of that? Let me that's pretty interesting. What I mean, like, just diving right into it, what have been some of the most unique things that you found flying over that many farms and that many different habitat types and different times of year too?
I mean, terrain's so much different, and each farm is definitely going to have its own characteristics and cool things. One thing is just how many deer are really out there. There's a lot of deer out there in a lot of parts of the Midwest, and been cool to see that, and understand more about true deer movement. What do they do during the day when we can't see them from a hunting perspective? When they're in the woods, when they're in their bedroom, you can learn so much, and that's been really valuable to me as a hunter myself. Just what is true deer behavior when most of the day.
Yeah. Have you noticed like like there's some common belief systems when it comes to deer bedding and the different habitats they like to use? Have you noticed any trends of like doe bedding area, buck bedding area, and like some of those more buzzy topics? Have you noticed any correlation of like the does are bedded on the edge of the habitat on a field edge, and then there's the 2 satellite bucks, and then even, another 100, 200 yards back is the mossy horns, the giant mature buck that they've been watching for the last 3 years. Is there anything that you've noticed, like the different trends that you read a magazine, listen to a podcast, and you're like, man, I've flown 200,000 acres. I don't see that.
I would say that what you just described is pretty typical. You kind of got the does, maybe where you think all the in maybe the best spot closest to the food, and then you got a couple satellite bucks, and then those mature bucks are kind of edge creatures just by nature. Typically off by themselves, and what you might think is less desirable habitat from just looking at it. That's definitely true. Deer, I've found they're always on their feet eating, and even when they're bedded in the woods. So when I do a survey, fly in the middle of the day, they're always browsing. Maybe half the deer we find 100 deer on 100 acres. 50 of them will be up on their feet eating at 11 a.m. in the woods. So, that's something to really think about when you're thinking about bedding, is what's the food right there? What's the browse actually where they're going to lay down?
So, I mean, with that being said, there's a lot of biologists and a lot of habitat managers that are so keen on providing high quality browse. That's what a lot of them really preach. And so that would fall into that thought model making a lot of sense versus like, could you have really great food plots or really good browse? And I feel like some of those guys would obviously say both. But if you had to pick one or the other, if you wanted to hold deer, it seems like browse would be the better option if you had to pick one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'll probably butcher exactly what Bill Winke said here when what he's doing on his new farm, but he's like, we got to not think about cover, and we just got to think about food. Making every acre of the 600-acre farm food.
Which I watched 2 of the videos you did with Bill. The first one, and then I think you did a follow up this year. Because he's constantly working on that farm, making a lot of different updates. He's got a whole series on YouTube of what they're doing on the farm. Did you notice any difference from year to year when you were back, the first year versus the second year?
It's definitely getting a lot better. I mean, even in a year, you see it in the deer herd. This deer looks super healthy. He's got the right structure. I love how it looks there. I mean, I think he's gonna do something great in 3-4 years. He's on that really good upward trajectory and of turning a not so good farm into a great farm. Mm-hmm. So it's cool to watch, because that's hard to do and takes thousands of hours of work. So
do you do a lot of year 1, year 2, year 3 visit the same farm, and landowners want to see first year they had whatever sex ratio and whatever deer density, and they were trying to get to a more balanced number or a healthy number? Have you done that, and does it usually work in a positive trend, or does it typically stay pretty similar?
I've just started doing more of those, and I haven't been in this for years to have years.
Yeah, you're on a short amount of data right now. I get that.
But I have done, a handful or a little more than that I've tracked year over year. And if you do it at the same time of the season, or my survey season is beginning of November to end of April. So if you pick a couple week time slot, you do that at the same time every year. So we're going to survey in February of 25, 26, 27. The numbers line up great. If they don't kill any deer and they're not already way overpopulated, their population's going to grow by what we think it is, which is, depending on where you're at, 10 to maybe 20%. Mm-hmm. So it's been really cool to see that actually line up. Unless there's a big EHD kill or some anomaly there, the numbers really do line up, and you can track your growth, track your, buck-to-doe ratio getting better. If we're covering at least a couple hundred, I always say 300 acres, minimum, then we have a large enough sample size to really get the good data that actually we can track over time.
The Whitetail Podcast is brought to you by Moultrie. One of the first cameras I ever bought was a Moultrie, and they've come a long way. Whether after your first deer ever or this is your 20th year of hunting, Moultrie has you covered. Their cellular trail cameras have no SD card, very easy to use and set up right out of the box. I love to pair the Power Mag with a Pro Series camera. The Moultrie cameras are affordable, effective, and reliable with US-based customer service, 2-year warranty, and just a great camera. So the next time you're in the store and you're trying to decide what camera to buy, I encourage you to try a Moultrie if you want to support the podcast. What do you think people misunderstand most when it comes to deer surveys with a thermal drone?
I think a lot of people think they already know it all about their farm, which, if you've hunted somewhere 10, 20 years, you know a lot. I mean, you know a lot, and at least you think you do, but the drone can just tell us stuff that you can't get if you spend every day on your farm. I mean, most people who guess how many deer they really have and are managing and are feeding, they're 25% off.
Usually too high or too low?
Usually too low.
Mm-hmm. So there's more deer on the landscape for a lot of farms than what they realize.
Mm-hmm. And how many deer you have and your buck-to-doe ratio, and not having too high of a density or too low of a density is a really important factor in management. It's if you don't have enough food or just don't understand the dynamic of your herd, you're definitely losing out on some potential from a management standpoint. So I'd say that people just don't know how many deer are really out there, and they don't think that the drone can. They don't think they need the drone, and they also don't think the drone can really tell you that accurately. But
how accurate how accurate? Let's say, all right, Jack, come out and fly this 100 acres, and let's say it's February, so there's no leaves, so it's a little bit easier to survey it. And I say, hey, let's say it's 100 acres, very overcast day, very awesome flying conditions. Do you think you would find every single deer on that farm?
I do, yeah. Unless it was 100 acres of cedar trees, in which I may miss some, just because those are hard. Sometimes they're tucked underneath those, but I do, yeah. I always tell people on larger surveys that we're about 95% accuracy, which they my clients, I hook a TV up to my remote, and they can follow along on everything that's happening. So they see how it works, and they see we're seeing squirrels and rabbits and all that stuff, everything that's out there. So they believe after they see.
Yeah. I think for people who haven't watched any YouTube videos or have any experience, it's hard to fathom that, they think that you send this thing up in the air and it's 400 feet up. And it's like, how can that thing recognize every single deer? But the technology is pretty crazy. And what was your biggest shocking moment on a farm that you flew? Like, was there a farm that there's 0 deer on this place, it's a desert? Or was it a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, there is way too many deer? Or I'll give you one more. This place is loaded with giant bucks. I've never seen anything like that.
I feel like that happens every other farm. I'm always surprised. There's always something cool out there. One farm, 1,600 acres in southern Iowa, and I flew it in November of last year, and then I flew it again in January. And in November, we found 420 deer. Now that's a pretty high density.
Yeah,
I think that's 150 or 60 per square mile, and that's high. That's a lot. That's as many as you should have with the best habitat.
Mm-hmm.
We flew it again in mid-January, and we found 910 or 15 deer. So more than double, and it was already really high. And, I was there with the landowner, and we were just like, oh my gosh. And that landowner had been harvesting 50 does per year for years, and he thought he was doing a great job. But just surrounded in a great neighborhood with lots of big landowners, not a lot of deer being taken, just that number went.
So do you think with January, he probably had a lot of standing food, a lot of good habitat, and do you think that he just sucked in 500 deer from surrounding areas?
It's exactly what happened. Yeah.
That's a lot. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There was some state ground next door that, it's not going to be managing for deer like a landowner like him. And that drew in, a lot of those deer had come over from that ground on his ground. And we found 130 deer on 13 acres.
What was the habitat like for that?
That was probably 250 acres of switchgrass around the edge of the farm. Almost to like keep them from leaving, which I think is a really great strategy. So 300 acres of that, probably 900 acres of timber, and then the rest were fields and food plots.
Where there was 100 some deer and 13 acres? Was that like warm season grass was like pockets of cedars?
No, that was just the middle of a 100-acre block of timber.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Up on a ridgetop, or I mean, I'm just trying to picture, because that's a lot of deer in a small area.
Well, I think if all those deer could have been on top of the ridgetop, they would have. But some of them got pushed down, just to pack all in. But yeah, it was that kind of a.
Was there like thermal cover on that ridge? Like, where they? I'm just trying to picture the composition of the forest.
It was just a big acre of timber where he'd done a bunch of TSI.
Okay.
There was zero cedar trees in that thing. Zero. It was just
good cover.
Cut timber, yeah.
That's fascinating. I wonder how many sheds they found in that 13-acre area. That'd be a lot.
I can, I've been blessed to hunt a lot of great stuff in Missouri, and I've killed big deer. But you go to a farm like that, and you're just like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
this is insane.
Yeah, that's out of this world. What do you feel that, like, you flew that farm in November and then January? How much different were the bedding areas upon that farm? I mean, if you overlaid the pins of where they were in November versus where they were at in January, how much difference was there?
November was more of an even distribution, and half as many deer in even distribution, and a lot of the deer were in a little ditch that went into a field, or just in less desirable areas, maybe more just to be spread out during the rut. And then in the winter, they were everywhere, but they were very few deer were in the switchgrass
In November?
in both seasons. Yeah.
Both seasons.
I mean, I probably found 10 deer in the switchgrass.
And there was like 90 acres of switch, you said?
Probably 200.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So a big area of switch.
Basically, he had the switchgrass all around the outside, maybe a couple hundred yards worth, almost to act as like a barrier that they wouldn't go through to cross the road, which I love. But so more of an even distribution during the rut. They were in less desirable habitat just to be spread out. And then as you go into, it was real cold in January. I mean, they were all in the good spots. So everywhere you think a deer would be, that's where they were.
Yeah. And so some of the bedding in November might have just been, you mentioned even distribution, but I also think some people may think, well, was it more random of just like, hey, I guess, when did you fly it in time, in the time of day, and then like roughly what part of November too would be another question.
It was November 18th and January 10th. And I mean, I fly from like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Yeah, it's a big far. Yeah, it's a big far. I guess you can't fly that one very quick. Yeah. Okay. Did you notice a lot of activity, like when you were surveying it? Because this is in Iowa, so their gun season hasn't happened yet. Is pretty high rut activity. Did you notice, like, man, I started at 9 a.m. I saw this buck on this side of the farm, and now it's 3 p.m. and I'm on the other side. That thing went, whatever it was, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and now he's dogging does over here. Like, did you notice any observations like that?
They were moving a lot that day, which made it tough. The January survey, they didn't move at all, but they moved quite a bit. I don't know if I had any more than 400 or 500 yards. Big bucks move, but when I section off and I'm flying, I try to make sense in my head. A deer wouldn't probably cross this, so you get this section of the farm done, and you move, so you don't double count. But and some of those deer were moving a lot.
Based off the how often do you fly in November? Because I feel like from a hunting application for someone listening, like what trends have you noticed as far as um, deer behavior in November by having eyes in the sky, as far as like the best habitat locations or any other observations that you've had um, for the month of November when you're flying your drone?
Deer are really evenly distributed, and I just mean that, you might have the best habitat around and have every reason the deer should be there, but during the rut, they're going to naturally have to spread out, and so that's why your neighbors might be holding more bucks than you think they should, and their farm's no good, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, you're not going to hold so many more deer that time of year as compared to late season, and I think people know that, but that really stands out with the drone.
Yeah, I have to imagine by flying as many acres as you have, like how much do you think it's honed into your ability to I don't want to say like read sign, but just your, I guess, natural instinct based off of, I mean, that's a lot of data that's in your brain from all the stuff that you find. Like, you have to feel a little bit more confident of looking at a farm or looking at a form of habitat in correlation to the time of year. Like, man, there should be deer here. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, it is. I think it's all about food. Deer are slaves to their stomach, and like I talked about with the browse earlier, we're doing a ton of TSI on where I hunt. I kind of manage with my dad on here in Missouri, but I've just seen, that's the number one biggest domino on a big timber farm.
Hmm.
Got to have that. So just always think about food, and always understand that that's the most important. They got to eat. So
What's the lowest deer density you've ran into, and what did it look like?
uh, Kansas always has really low deer densities if you're looking at it from just here's 1,000 acre square, because maybe the river creek that runs through there where there's the trees, trees along that's where the deer are, and so it can't hold that many. But if you looked at it per acre of cover in Kansas, it's pretty high. Actually, the farm I killed my biggest deer on, in central Missouri, it had a deer density of 35 per square mile. Big open cattle pasture farm, and it produces giant deer with that low density, but just every 4 or 5 years, because there's not that many to come up and take its place. But
Yeah.
cattle pasture farms, and Kansas, just big open ground. Generally, the lowest density you'll see where there's good hunting is like 25 per square mile.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you feel that have you noticed any sort of correlation with the quality of deer where, you're in an area where maybe there's 150 deer per square mile versus in like a Kansas, for example, with lower densities? Is there any truth to having I guess the question I'm getting at is the balance of quality bucks in relation to overpopulation. Or when you fly in some of the areas where there's just way too many deer, have you noticed that there isn't as many mature bucks, or have you noticed anything like that? You're my test
Yeah,
dummy here because all these theories we hear, like you have the data to back it up with just your own observation.
it's 100% true. There's a few, on really really good farms like the ones I just described, where the numbers are very high. Sometimes those are just anomalies where it's an A plus farm with A plus habitat, and it's got a lot of deer, and it still produces big deer. But for 80% of the farms out there, there's a pretty strong trend on, having too many deer and not growing the kind of deer that you think would be there. Um, and that happens a lot in Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, just because it's like fish in a pond. Once you have too many fish in a pond, your fish just can't get as big. There's a limited amount of resources that can be allocated to each deer, each fish. And so when you take some of those away, those those deer, those fish can get bigger and do better. So I've definitely seen that to be true. And
What have you found to be the sweet spot for deer density on a square mile basis?
I think around 100 is a great number. Maybe if you're looking at a square mile of timber, like 120. And that's really variable depending on, a closed canopy forest is going to be able to hold half as many deer as a forest where you've done TSI, or even, less. But generally, let's say a Midwest farm, 50-50 ag, timber, 100 per square mile is a great number to be at. And I'd say a lot of farms where, they're managing for hunting, they're at about 140, 150. So they've got.
How many years of management when someone says, okay, we have to shoot this many does for X amount of years to get to that number? Is that a conversation that comes up with some of those landowners when they're like, okay, we need to get to 100, we're at 150, and we're going to need to shoot 30 does for 3 years, like knowing that it can grow 10 or 20%?
Yeah, I think it's probably a 4-year process, roughly. The farm I hunt, it's central Missouri, square mile, basically it's 650 acres. It's 50-50 timber fields. And we had about 140 deer per square mile when I first got the drone and did a survey of it 3 years ago. And we've been hitting the doe harvest heavy, and we're getting close to like 110 per square mile now. So we've dropped it 20%, 25%, and it's taken 3 years of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still working to get that down.
What do you say to someone that says these drones they're going too far? This technology is not it's too powerful. What do you say to someone like that?
I think it is in the wrong hands, but just like any tool with thermal scopes that have been around forever and cell trail cameras, baiting in front of cellular trail cameras, which I think are much worse tools. But the drone can just give us so much great data. I mean, if used properly, it is definitely a big plus.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you embrace it and use it for what it can do, it's such a positive for deer management. It takes guessing out. And with better data, you can make better decisions and manage better. So I think in the wrong hands, it's bad, but I haven't seen too much of that yet, and they've been around for a while. And just like with thermal scopes, I mean, anybody could drive out to a bean field right now and see a big one and drop them. So I don't think it'll be too much of a problem.
Do you think that drones get an unfair shake with that, of like the argument that it's just too powerful, or, and I completely agree, in the wrong hands it could be, just like a variety of other forms of technology. But do you think that you see stuff of like, we have drones, we have this, we have that, and where do we draw the line? And based off what you're saying, yeah, it's probably way more effective than trying to get research herd analysis from trail cameras. Like, there's so many inefficiencies with that. But with a drone and you fly it, like, to your point, you see 95% of the deer, 90% of the deer, and you can put together a really clear plan or understand where you're at versus compiling trail camera photos. So I see your point of view. I really do. But I know there's someone listening to this like, they've gone too far. It's exactly what they're saying at the radio or whatever they're listening to.
And there's an element, there's an element of hunting where we just like everything to be unknown and a mystery. And when we go out and hunt, yeah, we want that. But from a management standpoint, if we can fly in March and see how many deer out there and know how many we need to take for that year, I don't see anything wrong with that, and think it's a great positive.
When do you think is the best time of year to get a true understanding of the deer density in your area? Because obviously, like the example when the Iowa farm in January had a bunch more deer than probably what it has right now. Would that be a fair guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when is the best to get like a true understanding of the density on your farm?
I've pivoted towards telling people to do a rut survey for the first year. Do a rut survey and then do one again February through April.
Mm-hmm.
And so that rut survey is going to give you what your rut density is. You're going to see that. I think that's really important. And then you're going to see, February through April is how many deer are more your resident population.
Mm-hmm.
It's how many deer you're feeding year round, and what your resident sex ratios are compared to your rut. So you get those two numbers and you can kind of see what they are, how they compare against each other. And then you pick one of those times, and then we do it at the same time every year at that time. So if you like November better, we do a November survey every year at the same time. If you like February through April better, do it then at the same time. But more importantly, over everything, I think, is tracking over time at the same time, because that gives you, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And you can really see that with those numbers.
What about, how often are you flying it in the summer? Just for fun, I imagine.
I fly every other night in the summer for fun. For me, I love it. It's just a great, go out there for 45 minutes, an hour, and see a bachelor group. I mean, it's stay in the truck, stay out of the bugs. It's great to do. And I'll do some. I probably got 10 or 15, summer evening surveys booked. It's a service I'd like to grow, but you just can't pull as much hard data from it. So it's hard to kind of convince people that it's worth it. But I fly quite a bit. I really enjoy it. Mid-June to mid-August,
Mm-hmm.
great time.
Have you had, I call you, hey, Jack, I might buy a farm here, or I just got a new lease. I need to fast track my learning here and make sure it's what I think it is. Does that happen a decent amount for you?
It started, yeah. I say fly before you buy. Yeah, but I think it's a great, phenomenal tool. Everybody should do it before, if you're especially if you're walking into a new neighborhood and you just don't know anything about it. Like, trail camera pictures are great, but why not see it real time for you and just get a great overview of the property. And a lot of people might not understand, if they're buying a 500-acre farm in Iowa and it's got a really high deer density, that to manage it properly, they need to harvest a lot of does every year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something to know before you buy it. If you're not going to be there hardly ever and you're not going to be able to do that, well, that might be a consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you can just learn so much so quick about a property flying it with the drone. So
what's something that you learned that shocked you from flying it? And it
from
could flying the drone. So like, even with you flying it, every other night in the summer, like it's got to be way more effective than cameras and glassing, I have to imagine.
Oh yeah, you can cover thousands of acres in a night, which is cool. And just that I recently in January, I kind of got, it's called the Moultrie 350 RTK drone, and it's got this special camera, and just how far away I can observe wildlife and they don't even know you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so cool to jump into their world and move on and learn so much so quick. They don't even know the drone's there.
Mm-hmm. How close do you think you can get with that? If like before getting like a head snap or like a deer getting uncomfortable?
I've been 150 feet, but usually I stay right around 400.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Don't need to go any closer. So
whether you're hunting public or private land, onX puts powerful mapping tools right in your pocket. See property lines, access, wind, and weather data. I have thousands of pins from the last 10 years, and it is one of the most effective tools for planning a hunt, to in-hunt, to post-hunt. Know where you stand, know the land, own the hunt with onX.
Yeah, I imagine. That's really fascinating. Do you think that there'll be a day, like just with any form of technology, things typically get better and more affordable? Do you think that there'll be a time where almost every serious landowner has a thermal drone, like in the next 10 years or 15 years?
I don't think that generation will embrace it enough for a lot of people to have it, even though they could afford it and get it and do that. When we talk more like 25, 30, I don't know. because that'll be us, and maybe not. Who knows if hunting will be real big then, and we'll have the same scenario we have now. I don't know. I hope so, but um, I don't think it'll happen. I think
Just from the adoption standpoint, and then having to get your license and do the whole thing.
Well, we're talking just recreational landowners
True.
having one using it on their farms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they will. They've come out with these drone docks where you can fly them from anywhere. I don't know if you've seen those, but
No.
You could have your hunting cabin in Iowa and live in Pennsylvania and fly it all from a computer. You could survey your farm every night if you wanted, and it's self-landing, opens a little weatherproof box, the drone pops up, you can fly the whole farm, see what deer are there that night, press a button, it lands, closes, charges, and that all streams through Wi-Fi to your computer back home.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know that existed. That is crazy.
They use those for construction sites and, security monitoring for big buildings, and they're blowing up everywhere. They're called the docks, DJI dock.
DJI dock. Wow. I could see that being maybe pretty fun. Like if you had a big farm and you live far away, and you could watch deer every single night if you wanted to.
I think a lot of people would do that. It's just, the barrier to getting everything like that set up technology wise, and maybe people don't want that, but
that's what have you learned from just your travels with different, because if someone's hiring you to come out and do a deer survey, they're probably really serious whitetail hunters and very serious managers. What have you learned from either a habitat perspective or anything else that has surprised you from being around, some of the most serious people when it comes to deer hunting?
Most of the people I've worked in the industry have just been awesome people. That definitely stands out. I've I watched them for a lot of my life, and good to not be disappointed when you meet somebody and them actually be good people. So that's been pretty cool. I've met 10% of the industry, but a lot of good people out there, and just how into it they are, even though it's their life. As I've jumped into doing this as a business and turning it into kind of a full-time job, hunting becomes a lot of, you can get a little more tired of it than if it was just a recreational hobby, but those guys are ate up with it 80 hours a week, Don, he's all about deer all the time. I love it. So
yeah, that's always surprised me too, of how bright that flame remains for that many years, and I have a lot of respect for that, where it's like it's fun to see, to where like I feel like some people's interest changes over years, or maybe they get jaded by it or whatever the case may be. But that is a very good point. How I think do you think timber holds more deer or warm season grasses?
I think straight plantings of switchgrass or CRP, I've seen with the drone. And again, most of the time I'm flying is mid-November on. So I think that's something important to keep in mind, because October is a lot different than that time frame. And then I think switchgrass probably holds a lot more deer then. But, from that time frame on, I hardly ever find deer in switchgrass or CRP. If you get like overgrown cattle pastures with mixed cedars, that stuff's phenomenal. Holds a lot of deer. But I think timber is the most, definitely holds the most deer. Because the deer, they're always on their feet eating. They browse all the time. So when you're in grasses, a lot of times you can't do that. And when you're in the woods, if you have good quality browse and food there, then they can, and that's what they want to do. So and that shocks a lot of people when I fly their farm. They're like, oh, I bet it, I just planted the switchgrass 3 years ago, or the deer have got to be in the CRP. I know they are, and then we find one, and it just.
Do you see regret on some of those landowners' faces when they're like, man, we did this because we thought it was going to hold more deer, And I mean, the definitive proof is when you fly it. Are they just, do they say, man, I wish I didn't do that, or I wish I would have done that differently? Or not, or are they not that bothered?
I had one guy hire me again to come back 3 weeks later because he just couldn't believe it, and we found the same thing.
No way.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, and I think they just like to learn. They just want to know. They don't mind trying things and not working, but it is a surprise for them.
I think it's probably a little surprising too, because if you walk through it every now and then, you'll find a bed. Like maybe there's a little crest or a little knob in a CRP field, and you see some beds. But at least I do, but I think that would be very shocking to have like 100-acre field and a couple deer are in the the warm season grasses.
And I think do they use it way more in the summer or early fall? They may. I think it's probably a great spot to get out of bugs or whatever, but in that later fall, winter time frame, I just haven't seen that with the drone.
What if it's a small, like a 5-acre patch of CRP? Is it still the same trend versus a large CRP tract? Does that make sense? So it's like picture, I don't know, there's different parts of the country that would have this where like the fields are naturally a lot smaller. So you have mixtures of timber, and you have like these little 3-acre, 5-acre, 10-acre fields of CRP, of warm season grasses. Does that trend stay true, or do you notice that there might be dotted in some of those little fields of CRP?
Not really, no.
Wow.
Yeah, I think probably the bigger fields are better, but I haven't seen that. I mean, I think CRP is great if you're really on a limiting factor, or switchgrass is great if you're really missing cover and you got to add it. Like, that's your option. You need to do that, and it works good for that. But if you have a substantial amount of cover already, or good timber, I don't think you need that.
Man,
don't need that for cover. Now you may need it for screening or kind of edges, but to say that's where my deer are going to bed and I'm going to plant acres and acres and acres of it in one spot to create bedding, I just haven't seen that to be true.
We have enough data. You have enough data, people should believe you. So I think that's really cool. I think that's with that. So just to correlate that to hunting, you would probably blow your scent into would you blow your setup to where your scent is blowing into a large CRP grass mix versus timber? I just walk a lot of farms and I see where people have like, maybe it's blowing in the timber because they're anticipating the deer to be in the CRP. Do you think that might be a wrong approach? And I know there's a million situations, but I'm just trying to get to any form of trend that you would apply to hunting based off that information.
Yeah, I would. The guy I sets up properties. He said he puts CRP where he doesn't, or not CRP, switchgrass where he doesn't want the deer to be. So where if I'm thinking about this from my access standpoint and where I don't want the deer to walk, that's where I'm going to put it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that's interesting. Is there anything else that you can think of that I think that is there anything else that you can think of that would shock people based off of your findings? I feel like we covered a lot of the really interesting things. Some of my key takeaways is landowners not realizing how many deer they have, the lack of deer bedding or bedding and browsing in warm season grasses, among some other things. But is there anything else that you can think of that you want people to know?
I can think of a cool example that kind of relates to habitat manipulation and moving deer where they want to bed. I'll kind of explain the scenario and we can talk more about it after, but this was a 480 acres in Missouri I flew, and the owner had 360 of it, and it was a 480 acre square block of timber, and then the bottom corner was not owned by him, the rest was. And so he went in and just had a crew come down and do really heavy TSI. I flew it in January of 24. They did really heavy TSI that spring and summer, and then I flew it again this winter, 25. And there was a really even distribution across the 480. The following year, after all that stuff was cut down, all the work was done, almost every single deer had moved on to him. So you could see this huge shift of them moving, maybe it being 70% on him, 30% on the neighbor, to 95% on him, 5% on the neighbor, all because of, him doing TSI. And it was just really cool to see that happen, and, draw his property boundaries on my map where you can see where the deer are and just see, the perfect line of seeing them come over.
Wow. Go ahead.
Habitat manipulation can really move deer, and the drone helps us see that. If you make your timber way better than your neighbors, then the deer are going to move over there. Are going to want to be there. So,
what? Because it sounds like you fly a lot of larger farms. Do you think that same thought model? Let's say someone has 20 acres, 40 acres, 50 acres, and so obviously the overall mass of the project is going to be smaller because it's a smaller parcel. But is there any example of someone that had you come out and fly 40 acres before they did any projects, 40 acres, a year after they did some different projects? Because I mean, obviously you can't, not a big farm, so the impact is less, but it might be more for your own, 40 acres around the fence. So what I'm getting at is, have you flown any smaller farms, back-to-back years and seen those different trends?
Not any under 100. I would guess it to almost be even more impactful on a smaller property. Absolutely, yeah. I think it definitely would be. So much cool stuff and so many changes you can make on a smaller property compared to a big property quickly. So, but no, I haven't flown any small properties like that in back-to-back years.
Awesome, man. Well, tell everyone what you do and all the different services that you provide and where you cover. You mentioned you cover 8 states, so we might have to bring out the whole U.S. map. But go ahead and tell people, what you do and how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, my name's Jack Huston. Company is called Midwest Deer Surveys. You can reach us at midwestdeersurveys.com or social media. That's Midwest Deer Surveys on all platforms. I do deer herd surveys with a thermal drone. So, like we've heard about on the podcast, just launch and I can tell you where your deer are on your farm and how many bucks and does you have and just where they're at. And I traveling all across the country this fall and winter doing these. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jack. I really appreciate it. I think people should have some more things to ponder on based off your, 200,000 acres of survey, 200,000 deer, 30,000. Let me back that up. 30,000 deer, 200,000 acres.
Yep.
Yeah. So after that much data, I think people are left pondering and maybe looking at some of the farms they hunt a little bit different after this conversation. So thank you so much for hopping on here.
Yeah. Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.